everyone. How are y'all doing? I'm gonna like kind of walk around because since it's kind of like so open, and I was hoping that we would have had the trailer so that you guys could ask me questions. I usually like to have the film or the trailer shown so there's a context. Kind of the film Sugar Pathways, it's a lecture within itself. But I didn't get a chance to hear what Sue said. I want to say to Susan Wall, thank you so much. Thanks for the Friends of National Park Services to invite me, and George Tyson, who recommended for this event to occur. I'm an award-winning filmmaker. I want to say I busted my behind to be an award-winning filmmaker. It was definitely not an easy path for me, especially because my family are business people, and to sort of branch out in the arts, as many of you know, is not the most acceptable thing, especially when you're going to college and your parents and scholarships are paying for it. But this place, ironically enough, is so special because when I first started the process of producing Sugar Pathways, I brought one of the interviewees. By the way, the film will be showing in full on Sunday at 1 o'clock at the Caribbean Museum, and I hope they have a generator. But this place you're seeing here, which is so ironic that we're out here, and my talk is pretty organic. So if you guys want to ask questions, keep me on track of stuff, by all means do. But this is where most of the Puerto Ricans arrived. Maybe my great-grandparents arrived in the 1920s right here in this waters. What got me involved in documenting the Puerto Rican experience, besides the fact that I am a Puerto Rican, my ancestry line is African from Puerto Rico, my mother's ancestors are Taino, Spanish, and like I said, my grandmother's family came here in the 1920s. For me, I studied at Antioch College. It was such an insignificant impact in my life. How many of you know Antioch College, Yellow Springs, Ohio? All right. So that was such an important place where I became a filmmaker. I entered as a poli-sci major, as I was telling one of the young students back, and I fell in love with filmmaking. I traveled to London. I went to Africa. And I was thinking about what were my next films. I had produced a big film called Exiles about homophobia in the Caribbean. And that film showed throughout the Out Film Festivals in Mexico and Canada, at Rutgers University. It was just, I didn't expect my senior film project to just blow up like that. And I was very young. And so that particular film started opening up some doors for me. And I went to New York, and I said, I lived in California, and I said, the Bay Area doesn't have a film community at the time. And so I said, and then the Bay Area was so small of a community, where once you know everybody, you sort of know everybody, so it's like St. Croix. So I said New York City would be the place for me to become an independent filmmaker. I was considering going to Tisch for film school. I didn't get accepted. And in a way, I'm pretty happy about that. I saved a lot of money. And I learned from working on people's films how to be a really professional filmmaker. And at that time, which was like about 1998, my friends were starting to protest against the US Navy. And that's like 1998, 1999. I'm clueless about Vieques. I don't know. I mean, I grew up here. I should have known. My father's ancestors are from there. I didn't know anything. I was thinking, I'm going back to Kenya. I'm going to do a film on gender identity in Kenya and a study about how the Muslim community embraces what at the time myself, because I could pass for a guy because I had a short haircut and I was going through a phase of masculinity energy. And so I was like, I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna make a film on sexuality in Kenya. And my friends pulled me in and they said, no. They said, homegirl, you gotta focus on Vieques. And I'm like, Vieques? And someone pulled me to the side and said, look, Vieques is a place where the US Navy is practicing bombings. We're protesting it. Someone got killed in Vieques, and I picked up my cell phone at the time and I called my grandmother right there and then. And I said to my grandma, who was here in St. Croix, I said, is our family from Vieques? And she said, yes. Psychologically, I wondered why throughout my teen years growing up here, why didn't they talk to me about Vieques? Why didn't they tell me, hey, you know what, you got maybe cousins in Vieques. Hey, you know what, our family came in the 20s here. Hey, you know what, my uncles had businesses here. They owned stuff. They had stores and restaurants right here in Company Street. My great-granduncle was the first Puerto Rican senator. But I was so little, I was so young, and I realized at that time, through the process of making Vieques and Island Forging Futures, which was a globally shown film, which is a film that was super important because it helped stop the bombings on Vieques, and I'm not bragging, I'm not. The fact is, the Vieques Island Forging Futures was utilized by protesters. I mean, the fact is that the psychological trauma that my great-grandparents went through, not only to get here, but to leave, and the struggle to be successful, to be business people, to be people treated with respect and love and collaboration, as we know. And so, and integrate. So they didn't talk to me about that, but the Vieques film was such an imperative film that I, at 24 years old, had no idea, right? I had no idea the impact until I started seeing people really using it. And I started seeing the Navy calling people that I interviewed thugs. And I would say, well, in the newspaper, I'd say, well, why are they calling them thugs when the interviewee is calling the US Navy thugs? And so at 24 years old, making an award-winning film that was utilized by students that were maybe protesting the World Trade Organization, I didn't expect that. To see it being used at anti-military conferences, to see it be shown at the Geneva Peace Conference, to being shown throughout universities, Harvard, Princeton, Rutgers, and it just gained its own world and notarization. And the reason why I mentioned Vieques and Island Forging Futures is because it was such a pivotal film to produce Sugar Pathways. If Vieques and Island Forging Futures wasn't produced, I would have never made Sugar Pathways. In fact, Vieques and Island Forging Futures was Sugar Pathways, was to be that. When I went to document the protesters on Vieques, that's where it hit me. That, oh wow, my family's from Vieques. That's where it hit me, the struggle. That's where it hit me, the depression that people were going through. And I don't expect everyone in this here to really understand that, because it does ruffle some feathers, right? It makes you believe that, well, anti-army, anti-military, anti-government, and that's really not the center of what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about are films, people in films that were being faced with living on an island that was practiced on depleted uranium, Agent Orange, you name it, it was practiced on Vieques. Live bombings, people forced out like my ancestors from their homeland and told, hey, you know what, there's another island to go to. You should go there. And for me personally, when I finished Vieques and Island Forging Futures, to be the person I am today, to be the person that I can be lovable and feel love and give love and be excited about all of you and myself, I had to do a healing process. I had to really understand why the country that I love so much, did something so terrible to my ancestors? Why was 500-pound bombs falling over, not necessarily over their heads, although there were times when that occurred, but why did that happen? And I started to understand racism. I started saying, well, Franklin Roosevelt didn't quite understand what Puerto Ricans are all about. In 1917, Puerto Ricans became U.S. citizens. I think by 1927, the Virgin Islanders became U.S. citizens. I mean, we're talking about World War I and World War II. Very different dichotomies, very different era, where segregation was at its forefront. People were in fear of Japan. And so when I look at it from that context, I can forgive. I can say that context was at the time, and I'm not going to be angry about it because I can't make another great film. Your lens cap, Joanne. Your lens cap is on your. But you know, I wouldn't be able to love. I wouldn't be able to give. I wouldn't be able to release the magic that's in me. I learned so much from producing that film, and it's on YouTube. You can go see it for free. Vieques and Ellen Forging Futures. That film is still showing. People still utilize it. I still get invited over Sugar Pathways to show it around the world. So Sugar Pathways thoroughly looks as a result of making a film that ruffles some serious feathers, that made people uncomfortable, particularly people who are very much support the military, and also people being very judgmental. A lot of people loved it, and then there's always someone that didn't like it because they didn't understand why this occurred, the context of history. So for me, I knew I had to do a job. For me, Sugar Pathways was not only about me and my ancestors and my family, but it was a job of teaching people the history of expropriation, the history of people being displaced from their homeland against their will, and making the best out of it by coming to another place, which is here. And they did that. So Sugar Pathways took me 10 years to produce. I was living in New York, and I went to I know every grant there is as far as at that time to apply for. And it took several years for someone to take me serious, because at that point I was now 25, 26. And I had a big film in my hands. Sugar Pathways was, when we first edited, was 3 hours long. I mean, I was very young. I'm still young, but not as young as then. And so when you look at the film Sugar Pathways, the first thing that's gonna shock you, that's gonna hit you, that's gonna make people feel uncomfortable, because I had a focus team and they all critiqued it, was that the film starts with the celebration or the protest of the Navy finally leaving Vieques in 2003. So you have a group of professionals that are breaking down the place in Vieques, and they've rushed in there, and it's really confusing. And purposely did that. Someone said, well, you need a hook. What better hook can you have as human beings who are hurt, who have gone through so much, whose ancestors have been displaced, and some of them still remain, than showing their form of releasing their anger, which is human, which is normal, which makes sense to me. And so that's how Sugar Pathway starts. Once you see that, you start seeing the process of Christiansted from the 1900s. You see it through 2D moving images of when these roads weren't fixed, when people were still living in the towns and mixing. You go through that process, and then you start hearing about a person named Basilio Felix, and you hear about Richard Schrader, and they start telling, Richard Schrader's from St. Croix, he's written the book Callaloo. He starts explaining his experience from his point of view of seeing Puerto Ricans arriving to St. Croix. Now, the migration of Puerto Ricans from Vieques and Culebra came at different times. Culebra, also the U.S. Navy, Culebra and Vieques were a part of Roosevelt roads. By the mid-1900s, Franklin Roosevelt fell in love with Puerto Rico and the way that Puerto Rico was in its location to fight the Nazis. And so that included the U.S. Virgin Islands, and it included Vieques and Culebra. So Culebra, from I think by the early 1900s till about 1971, was a military base as well, a military practice base, while Vieques became a military practice base by the 1940s. So these migrations of people occurred, like I said earlier, the 1920s, and then you have a large migration by the 1940s where thousands of people are coming through these waters, or even, I'm not sure, I never got any testimonies of coming through Frederickstead. And of course, this was sort of customs. So people were actually held in these buildings in quarantine, because although Americans were coming to, as you all know, living here, Americans traveling through U.S. territories, they were not allowed to just easily go into town. They were held for 2 to 3 days because they were said they had hookworms and diseases and needed to be cleared. So in context of Sugar Pathways, that's the deepness. I mean, I'm thankful to the Paul Robeson Foundation out of New York that was one of my first grantors. I'm grateful to the Virgin Islands Humanities Council. I'm grateful to Hunter College, which paid for all of my research. I spent 3 years at the National Archives. I researched thoroughly this film. And I'm grateful to the Department of Tourism of the Virgin Islands, because without them I would have never been able to finish the film. I can go on and on and on and on and on and on about the film and all its details, but I think what's so imperative about the film is that the road that Christiansted Company Street, which is so ironic we're doing this out here, that this was majority Crucians and Puerto Ricans. And that these families, they all got along, which when you look at other countries and you see what's happening in other countries, particularly Dominican Republic and Haiti, you see this Latin American black conflicts. We didn't have that here. We did have people that were uncomfortable either for language and honestly even skin. But somehow these folks really got together. Because when I interview, folks that are in their 70s and late 70s, and they talk to me about Company Street and skiing and walking at 4 a.m. down these streets, and how much fun it was. Vieques was sort of like la taza de oro, the golden cup of sugarcane production. These were very skilled people. They were hardworking people. And so, in a way, through my archives, when the people from Vieques and Culebra came here, they were talking to the Crucians that were working in the sugarcane field, and they were surprised how low Crucians were being paid. I mean, this is so well documented in the newspaper archives, how low a worker would get paid. A Viequense would get paid $1.25 per se. A Crucian cane worker would get paid 50 cents. A Viequense would be promised land if they worked at a central, a factory. They would get promised a piece of land. People here didn't get that. So these dichotomies sort of started a revolution of equal pay, better working conditions, and George Tyson documents quite well. Arnold Highfield talks about it quite well. And then we have a resurgence of migration that occurs, that it starts happening in the 60s, where Viequense teachers, Puerto Rican teachers, start coming into St. Croix again. Now, St. Thomas and St. John, the film didn't have 100% focus in there because the Viequenses that migrated were not as large numbers. And there are very little numbers in St. John. Although ironically enough, I found that I had relatives in St. Thomas that I had never met until Sugar Pass was completed. But St. Thomas, because it's such a business, mercantile community, the Viequenses that went to St. Thomas, the Puerto Ricans that went to St. Thomas from the mainland of Puerto Rico or Culebra were business people. So the film looks at that, but not in its most detail. I talk about my family's migration in the film, but I don't pinpoint and say, well, that's my family. As a filmmaker, making a film about your own home country, this was the hardest film I've ever had to make that I think of. And I think it will be maybe the hardest film because I live in this community, because in this community you can't hide. In this community you can't take a break. And so there was nowhere I could go where someone was asking about the film. So I never had like a relaxation to really be able to just breathe. I was constantly, for those years, working on editing. It was important for me. My goal with the film also was to be a film. The people that I brought in to work for this film, through the grants that I got, through the Department of Tourism, that somehow it was my hope that we would really kick off with more films being produced, that there would be a film community. And that's now happening, but Sugar Pathway was completed in 2009. So it's been a long time. I don't know what else to share with you because the film is so in depth. I can tell you as far as the centennial, that Puerto Ricans played such a pivotal role. Puerto Ricans were leaving Puerto Rico in the 1800s to come here to work. And the Danes, and these are factual archives, and the Danes were saying, hey, go back. Puerto Rican rose, and I think Dr. Chinziri reminded me of this when I gave a talk to young kids at elementary school at Eulalie Rivera. And for me, identity is so important, especially now with Ancestry.com. I think people are getting more involved with identity. Where are their ancestors from? Where is their DNA? For me, I was already doing that question at a young age. So my mom told me, hey, you know what, your ancestors are Taino. Well, you know what, Tainos were here in St. Croix. Well, my dad was like, well, my prominent great-grandmother who married, and it's important for everyone to understand this, that the complexity of class and economics within our Caribbean community, right? Because a lot of times we have folks coming from the States, and sometimes they undermine many Caribbean people that are wealthy, and they've made their wealth right here on this ground. And so there was a Spanish, French, Viequense woman who was predominantly Mexican and probably like 5'8", 5'9". She married a sugarcane worker who's an Afro-Puerto Rican from Luquillo. I mean, she married down. That was her second. My great-grandmother must have been a revolutionist in the women's movement because that was her second marriage. But she, I think, sincerely, with my great-grandmother, she followed her heart, she followed love, and she married who she wanted to, and she was right on the money when she said to go. Because my great-grandmother's family didn't experience expropriation. My grandfather did experience that because he came through the 1940s. That's one thing that the film doesn't really talk about, is my personal experience. And I say that because I had to play, again, it was so tough because locally people here to think, well, she's making a film of her family. I didn't want people to walk away and say, well, Jo is making a film about her people, them. I wanted to really give a good context of all these families and diversity of all colors in this film. Because, I mean, I know it's being used to describe the LGBTQI community, but when I was in college, diversity meant people of color. And so for me, this particular film was a way for people to understand, take their time and watch it, and know the context that Virgin Islanders played with the United States, and what a group of people who came, whose food is still being eaten, whose music is still being heard, whose, you don't know today who's Puerto Rican and who's not. It was important for people, young people, to know where they came from. Because I learned through my process of education that it's so important to know your ancestors. And I didn't have that gift. I had to go through a whole circle to be able to be in with so much love. So I'm going to take questions, because I think I talked a lot.
Okay. I was pretty much aware of the 40s evacuation of Vieques. But you're going back like to 1920. What was the environment? What was going on that the first wave of immigration occurred?
Good question. His question is, what was the environment? What was the first wave environment like, I guess, in Vieques for people to come here? The environment, without me being there, but based on research and my talks with my grandmother, Paquita Marrero Figueroa, the environment was that when they came just about the 1920s, mid-1920s, the U.S. was already starting to go through a Great Depression. So the sugarcane companies in Vieques were already starting to close down, and work was being reduced. And still St. Croix had not even known any effects of the Great Depression. So I'm assuming for my great-grandparents and those Puerto Ricans that came here in the 1920s, they were being aware of, because they were also coming from a really business sort of mindset, that the economy was going to go down. So they jumpstart that, because I think there were, just the top of my head, I don't want to give misinformation, but there were 5 sugarcane factories. Out of those 5, already about 2 to 3 they were just starting to shut down. Yeah.
So when can we see it? You're over here. Is there another show?
When can we see it? Well, the trailer we were going to show tonight, which is 3 minutes, which is pretty packed. You got to come to the Caribbean Cinema, to the Caribbean Museum Center at 1 o'clock, Sunday.
You can watch it online.
You can watch it online on Vimeo, Johanna Bermudez-Ruiz. It's like $9.99 for, you download it, you watch it for a day, you can watch it on your Apple TV. Talk to these folks.
I thought you said we could watch it on YouTube.
Vieques and Island Forging Futures you can watch on YouTube. I want to go back to what Steve asked earlier, because it's so imperative, his question about this migration and what caused people to leave. When I interview people about leaving in the 1940s, because what kept me committed to making Sugar Pathways was one pivotal information, which was that people in the 40s were receiving letters by what I assume are marshals coming into what we call the bush, into the bush, and telling people they had 24 hours to leave. I have those letters are in the film. No, they had 24 days to leave. But those 24 days were 24 hours. So like my grandmother remarried, and my step-grandfather gives a testimony in the film. He was 19 years old, and a bulldozer just shows up in his house. And this has happened, mind you, in the US. This has happened throughout California, where people, because when you see the film, you're going to see the archives of soldiers practicing how to bulldoze people's homes made out of wood. I mean, this is not a new dichotomy that occurred in Vieques. It was just that it was happening as displacements. But that was one aspect that kept me committed to making Sugar Pass, because that was a curiosity of how did that happen? How did American citizens lose their homes, bulldoze, they got their letter way late? That was one. The other thing that impacted me was the interviews that where people discussed that they gave up their land because of fear. Toma, cógelo, llévate, no, los vamos. People didn't have homes. They gave up their homes. They didn't have a place to live. They were under the sunlight, in the water, and rain. I'll be right there. But that particular moment of expropriate that happened, I found so unique. It just kept me going, because that was also the experience. And that was a result of Pearl Harbor. When those people heard about what Pearl Harbor did, look how American they were. They gave up their land, their home, willingly, because they were fearful that their little island would be bombed. And it was.
Yeah, a question now.
I'll come right back to you.
Yeah, so I'm a generational product of that, but what is the sentiment today with the people? Social impact.
What is the economic, social impact? Well, you know, Vieques can be is definitely a case study, right? Because you had the U.S. Navy, which provided a lump sum of jobs to people of Vieques, and they provided a lump sum of jobs to the people of Roosevelt. And as I was preparing for this chat today, I was going back into reading some of the stuff that occurred. The pulse of Vieques today is, well, it's much peaceful. The beaches are easily accessible for the most part, because Vieques is the east, I think it's the west side of Vieques where the actual bombings occurred. No, the east side of Vieques is, they're still cleaning it up. They're still getting rid of the bombs. Wildlife Services is taking over. It's the most strangest, for me as a person, the strangest understanding. Wildlife Services is protecting an area where bombs are in the waters. For me personally, when I was filming in that area and documenting it, I suffered PTSD. Because when I would come here, I was traumatized by the coral reef, because I thought the coral reefs were bombs in the water. I mean, that was real serious healing that I did. So it's a perk, because Vieques has now 5-star hotels, 4-star hotels. They have boutique hotels. The bioluminescent bay, people are traveling from all over the world. The Bio Bay makes about $4 million in tourism tours. So it's not a corporation like the US Navy that's providing jobs. But Vieques, I want to inform you all that the community organizers that were fighting for peace and the bombings to stop created a sustainable plan, a sustainable economic plan after the Navy left. Unfortunately, that plan, because Vieques is the municipality of Puerto Rico and everything has to go through San Juan, unfortunately that plan has not been fully in effect. But I'll tell you that people are more tranquilo, more calmer. Their tourism is just going up. And, you know, so there's a dichotomy, right? You ask yourself, do you want to live in a place where bombs are falling every 6 months and your house is shaking and they're real bombs, like real stuff, and do you want to get cancer and you want to, you know, have that medical bill, or do you want to live and breathe air that's clean and find an alternative way of making the economy? I mean, it's a scale. And it's a tough scale, and it's a hard decision for people to make anywhere in the world, including St. Croix. Any more questions? Oh, wait, Rosanna.
To go back on what you were saying about the migration, were people given any type of financial assistance to leave with?
Were people given any financial assistance? No. No. When people save their little pennies, because pennies were worth a lot more, and they hopped on what they called un bote de vela, which was sail, a sailboat, and they would be stuck 2 to 3 days on that ocean, and there were days where they couldn't make it here, and they'd have to go back. 3 days in that water between Vieques and St. Croix, and they'd be sent back. So no, they were never recompensated. I don't see them ever getting recompensated. I don't see my grandfather, who's actually has a key named after him, Bermudez. We will never see that back in our family ever again.
Joanna, I hate to cut this off.
That's fine.
But I think Rick is filming in the dark now.
Yeah. Well, she has one last question.
Coming on. One more quickie.
Was there one person or what group of people organized the protesters? Was there one person
Well,
that led them? And what,
yes.
What form did their initial protest take?
Okay, very good question, and I'll make this fast. When David Sanes, when the 500-pound bombs went astray from its target on the east end of the island, and it missed its target and hit the operation post, which ended up killing David Sanes and injuring 4 other soldiers, what occurred was an energy of passion, and one human being decided to go to the bombing range and camp there and refuse to leave. And he was Tito Kayak from Puerto Rico. And that one human being, another human being who was in Vieques from the Zenon family, whose brother is here, was thinking about it and said, well, we can't leave him out there by himself. And then from that one person came another person, and then to answer your question, people from Japan came, people from France came, people from all over the world came.
What year was that?
1999, it was 1 year of people camping on a bombing range. I don't think that's ever been done in history. Yeah, and it was very scary because what you were told, and it was peaceful, so professionals came, attorneys came, senior citizens came, elderly came, clerks came, the Catholic Church was involved, the faith movement, everyone got involved from all over the world, but professional people that teach you how to do civil disobedience were constantly, every day, when there was a new group coming, you'd have to do a workshop of peace, understand what you were going through so that there was no violence. So it's really a case study. I thank you. Gracias.